Hey, welcome to Animation Dissection, the podcast that is running out of ideas for a clever introduction, so I'm speaking faster than my brain can come up with thoughts. Help! I am doing this blind, and one word is coming after the next, and there are no thoughts corresponding to their sequence. Please, end this now before it goes on any longer. Why aren't any of you stopping this? Anyway, I am Neeksy, and I'm here, of course, with Zorak.
Howdy.
And today we are going to be talking about American Dad. But before that, let's go into the animation news. So I have only a couple stories this week, not too much going on. And the first one is Nick Park, who is the director of Wallace and Gromit, is going to be heading up a new feature film called Early Man. This is going to be a stop-motion animated film. It's going to be at Aardman. And actually, it's his first film since Were-Rabbit. I could have sworn he had directed something else after that, but it's kind of been a while. So apparently it's going to be not just a prehistoric adventure, as you know by the title Early Man, but it's also going to be a soccer film.
So they're going for Early Manchester United.
Yes, Early Manchester United, and there's going to be dinosaurs and mammoths living with mankind at the same time.
I'm sure this will do exceedingly well in the United States.
Yes, America loves soccer so goddamn much.
Though, less sarcastically speaking, it'll do probably gangbusters everywhere else.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's Nick Park, and I fucking love what Nick Park does. I mean, the Wallace and Gromit movie, Were-Rabbit, is still one of my favorite animated films, so it's like, I'm excited, so we'll see. But again, I was surprised to see that he hadn't really directed another film since Were-Rabbit. Like, I thought he was the one directing Pirates and things like that, but
was he just producing during them?
I guess so. But it'll be nice to see more Aardman things in general, because I like what they do.
Right.
And then I'm not sure how big this news is, because it's a film that's mostly been known, and a figure that's mostly been known kind of independently and among artists rather than the general public. But the director of Ernest and Celestine, his name is Benjamin Renner, is adapting his comic that he's been producing independently for television. The comic is Le Grand Méchant Renard, or The Big Bad Fox, and it's going to be an animated series for TV. And I think if you look on either YouTube or I think on Cartoon Brew or other sites, there's kind of a little bit of a, not so much a pilot, but kind of like an animation test he's done for it, and it looks really, really cute. Like, it has this kind of watercolor pen ink style, kind of like what Ernest and Celestine has, and I'm kind of excited to see it because I just love that guy's style. And then, let's see, last story. So the Konami fuckery continues, not directly from Konami, but now that PT has been taken offline forever, people are now selling the systems with the game loaded on it with, like, massive markups. Like, some of these systems are going for like $1,000.
I'm pretty sure eBay took those all down, actually.
Well, I hope so, but
because their terms of service doesn't allow you to actually sell digital software.
Well,
because it's contractually technically stuck to your account and you cannot sell it.
Yeah, but that's what people are trying to do, and apparently the price is, of course, it's like what was it, that Flappy Bird game, when people weren't able to buy that anymore, and then people started selling devices with the game loaded on it for like hundreds of dollars for this shitty game. I mean, BT's not shitty, but it just kind of goes to how screwed up this situation has become.
Yeah, I have to imagine that Konami, given how they've been, refocusing themselves, they're probably not going to do anything in mainstream gaming or probably animation ever again, I would suspect.
Or if they do, they're going to have to do it with quite a bit of apologizing first.
No, I think they've kind of established that they're well out at this point, and to be honest, nothing that they've indicated has shown that they're willing to be at all apologetic or kind of go down that route. They've been exceedingly passive aggressive in all their actions as of late, and super tone deaf. So a lot of this stuff seems to be driven by their multi-million-dollar CEO. Kind of seems to be driving this. That's speculation, mine, but it seems like that's kind of what's going on here. So.
Either way, it's all turning into a funny flaming disaster.
At least Koji Igarashi is doing his own Kickstarter now.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of those Kickstarters from these independent artists going on, so that's exciting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we can get some stuff like this for animation projects as well. I mean, we've seen some of this already out of Kickstarter, but it'd be nice to see more sort of that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's starting to get more. I even contributed to one called Under the Dog, so
Yeah.
that's interesting. And the Little Witch Academia being done
Yep.
by Trigger.
Yep. I
So
backed
those were
those,
ones.
and Kickard actually came out even.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, that was kind of like the big first one that I remember really taking Kickstarter to heart and going like, I'm a known quantity, and he was very clear that what he was asking for was not money to make the film or finish it, but to kind of improve it and be able to kind of do more in betweens and what he wanted, which was by being very upfront about what he was doing with the money and kind
Mm,
of not doing it to fund the entire project, but to add to it was a very smart move to kind of be kind of a groundbreaker in that regard.
yeah.
Because trying to do a whole feature film funded on Kickstarter at that time, no one would have been able to do it,
Yeah,
especially with
and
how
certainly
much it costs.
Kickart is not a full feature film by any means. It is a
Oh yeah,
relatively very short.
yeah,
Fun though.
yeah, definitely. But it kind of took a lot more people, kind of like Yuasa, to put their hat in the ring essentially before anyone else was going to do that.
Yep.
So we're seeing a bit more of that. I'm a little bit wary though because some companies are going to Kickstarter not because they need the funding, but because it's now kind of become a marketing and advertising thing. So like they're already pretty much funded, and it's great that they can get some extra money maybe for extra features, but they really don't need it, and it's being done as a way of kind of prefabricating populism on some weird way. It's still, I think, a really great system for a lot of people. Like, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater by any means with Kickstarter, because it's really great that now people can get funding for projects that normally don't get even noticed, or who do you even pitch it to? But at the same time, I can resent a system where it's been turned into a way of these companies hedging their bets by using public money as opposed to their own money.
Well, what the thing that I'm most concerned about is that the idea with Kickstarter that you seem like kind of the grand idea behind it is that anybody can go on there and if you can prove yourself and convince enough people, you can get enough attention for people to back your project. But the thing is that that's not really how these things and these projects have been really playing out, at least for animation and gaming and whatnot.
Mm.
It's all just been, hey, I'm an established person, with an established catalog. I want to make more like that thing I made that you liked, and that's it. There's
Right.
very little in
It's
the actual
going back to the
innovation.
nostalgia thing.
Yeah, it's all kind of peeling back to like, hey, you remember this? You remember me? Wouldn't you want more of that? There's very little of like new faces coming on there. It's like I actually have something interesting I want to show you. Look at me. Nobody's like make very few people at least. It's not saying that nobody is, but very few people. The smaller percentage of people are actually making something of themselves because of Kickstarter.
So basically, you're saying that not many people are getting their start at Kickstarter as much as it's the attention is going towards people who are established.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's both good and bad in that regard, and also kind of there's a bit of a reasonable thing to it where someone who's getting their start at Kickstarter, they don't have any projects to their name. So when people are investing in it, they don't really have history to go off of. Okay, this person knows what they're doing and has done
Sure.
something before. But again, at the same time, the downside to that is that if the spirit of Kickstarter is to be the start for a lot of people who haven't been able to do that before, then it's kind of distracting, or it's kind of giving help to people who already have the ability to help themselves.
Right.
But so again, it's there's a good and a bad, and I don't think throwing the entire system out is what would work to kind of fix it. But I think people getting proper attention to it and kind of learning how to plan these projects out a bit more, or just using social media as a way of giving attention to these smaller projects and these people who are really interesting artists that normally who have the ability to actually make something, not like fucking potato salad and shit like that, but like kind of a lot of artists and independently minded people trying to help each other get the promotion.
Right.
So it requires a lot of coordinated organizing. Like a lot of the stuff, people kind of like to think that meritocracy is, oh well, someone just makes something great and it's going to eventually get people to flock to it. Unfortunately, even if it is a really great work, there always has to be some kind of networking going on to get people to see it before you can get that ball rolling. Once you get that ball rolling, of course, then it becomes a bit easier. But that initial spark can sometimes be entirely arbitrary of like, something great that gets seen and something great that never gets noticed. So we'll see how that changes.
Yep.
Anyway, on to the main subject of this week. We are talking about American Dad, an animated comedy that originally premiered on Fox, now on TBS. Started in 2005. It has run for approximately 12 seasons. It is created by Seth MacFarlane, Mark Barker, and Matt Weitzman. And the cast is Seth MacFarlane, Wendy Shaw, Scott Grimes, Rachel McFarlane,
Seth
Patrick
MacFarlane
Stewart.
again.
Well, yeah, Deed Bradley Baker, and that's the kind of the main cast. So initially, the show was pitched as a political satire along the lines of, let's say, All in the Family, and its initial kind of tenured approach was pretty much dropped really quickly. I think within the first few seasons, they realized that doing, oh, it's a conservative dad with a liberal daughter, and just doing that over and over again, they realized how limited that was. And they kind of over time they started going much more towards farce and kind of experimental humor and going more towards like family oriented sitcom as the plot and the impetus for things. There is still political commentary, as Stan is very much like an expression of American conservatism, but his personality over time is kind of defined by other aspects, like and his history and certain psychological quirks that the show has kind of done over time, like the relationship with his dad and his mother and some historical stuff, rather than just being a person who's defined by a bunch of GOP talking points, which was kind of a nice change. But it's definitely changed. They had a huge writing writer change around like the fifth or sixth season, although you started seeing some changes around the third and fourth, just like as they started embracing a lot more of this experimental. I mean, I hate using the word experimental over and over again, but it's like surrealistic and non sequitur kind of. It's random, but without being too random. And it's really hard not to talk about the show without talking about the show that preceded it, that is casts a very heavy shadow over it, Family Guy. And while visually fairly similar, they kind of, in certain ways, they are very similar in tone, but in other ways, they're very different from each other. So it kind of started off with a little bit of that formula that Family Guy had, but it became much more experimental over time. And it's a lot more focused, I think, on cohesive in episode story. Whereas like Family Guy, each episode, I can't remember what happened or why, because there's no real character arc within the episode. And yes, American Dad, they often hit that reset button so characters don't make real change that sticks with them. But that's a thing, frankly, with a lot of sitcoms in general. But American Dad has a lot more focus, I think, within each episode, even though oddly at the same time, it goes off on these very strange tangents. So, and the other big difference is that, unlike Family Guy, there are almost no cutaway gags at all, which is weird.
Well, they do their own sort of cutaway gags in the sense that they do like panning within the scene to something slightly off frame, and they essentially use that as a cutaway gag in and of itself. They're less pop culture driven, but they do that sort of,
Well, it
they
feels
do the
very,
same sort of jokes.
yeah, it feels a little bit kind of like an improv session. Like each episode is, I don't know if you've ever watched like long form improv versus kind of like short form. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it feels like the American Dad thing overall is long form improv for each episode. So like they have a story to tell because there is a beginning and middle and end, and usually some kind of character conflict of some sort that they kind of try to see through to the end and end it all with they try to tie it up usually, but along the way they'll have some running gags and some little oddities and tangents, but it is oddly focused at the end. At least it feels to me. Especially, well, mostly it's not as focused as it could be. I mean, a lot of TV shows are way more focused. I mean, as we talked about with Steven Universe, it has a plot and it's a lot more focused. It has very small tangents with Steven Universe, but they're just kind of maybe one sentence jokes. Here, they're willing to just divert quite a bit, and it's not that focused. But I think with shows like this, they really live and die by whether or not they make you laugh than anything else. So is it fair to judge it by the same standard as you would a show like MASH or Cheers or something like that? When,
Yes.
well, it could be, or it could just be like It's trying to be just funny.
It's
So
Family.
well, okay, so let's get into this. So we watched a selection of episodes. I selected them because I'm a fan of the show, even though I admit its faults. But I wanted to see if I could come up with a set of episodes that would show not just where it came from, but where it started to go, and some of the range of episodes where here's more of a standard kind of plot, and then here's one where they just completely get into some strange concept as the framing device for it. So we watched Dungeons and Wagons, Stanny Slickers 2, The Legend of Ollie's Gold, The Vacation Goo, Stan's Food Restaurant, Familyland, Ricky Spanish, and Blood Crieth Unto Heaven. So, Zorak, what did you end up thinking about American Dad?
So I came into this entire thing with these episodes feeling generally pretty neutral towards Family Guy or American Dad. Towards Family Guy, I'm much lower than neutral.
Oh, yeah,
So I
same.
came into American Dad kind of neutral in the sense that I'd watched some of it previously, and it really never did anything for me. It felt very Family Guy-esque, because the early seasons kind of are Family Guy political humor, blah.
Yeah.
And so I came in here kind of neutral, leaning low. I watched the early season episodes that you provided to me, and I outright started fucking hating it.
Yes.
So good job there. And
Yep.
then when I watched the later episodes, I came around to it in the sense I've moved back towards the neutral side of things. It's kind of comes across later on, I'd say, almost as like a less likable Futurama, if that's anything you
I
can
think that's a
describe.
certain level. Like the show with Futurama as a big example is that show carried a lot more of the earlier Simpsons style, in that the characters had kind of a pathos behind them that was not entirely undermined at all times,
Hmm.
and it was allowed at certain moments to take certain things seriously, and was willing to end episodes on a sweet note rather than trying to just get that last joke in there every single time. I would say for me, American Dad reminds me a lot more of The Critic in certain ways. It never attempts the same pathos as The Critic because it just can't take itself seriously at that level. But the oddity and a little bit of the experimental and just trying to do a lot of different things and see what sticks. It feels like certain parts of The Critic remind me a lot more of American Dad.
I'd say though the difference between the critic and American Dad is that the critic had some really sort of intelligent jokes in it,
Well,
and
yes. The-
American Dad has some occasionally pretty funny like pacing of jokes. I think where there's some good visual gags that I think work quite well. For example, the Stan's Food Restaurant episode had a lot of interesting use of actual cutaways and stuff, where it cutawayed into flashbacks and stuff, where he's having a flashback on the car about his restaurant of his youth that he loved that restaurant. Has Francine grab the wheel as he goes and looks out the window, and
to
kind
reminisce, yeah.
to reminisce. That is a very funny visual gag. Or later on, where he's does the same thing with Roger, and then Roger does like a song and dance number, and then he's like clapping afterwards and handing him flowers and
Well, they
stuff.
don't show the whole thing. They
They
just
don't show. They
imply.
show the end of it. They show
Yeah.
the cutaway. That was pretty funny. There's a lot of stuff like that where it's an interesting use of kind of the this wouldn't work actually in real life because it'd be really hard sort of thing. But a lot of the actually kind of badoom gags fall really flat because they're kind of like this joke would have been pretty funny I guess if I were like what 12. There's a lot of the 12-year-olds in the audience are laughing it up at this one. There's a lot of gags like that in here.
I think what you
But
ended
there's a
up
lot of really interesting
liking.
visual gags
Well,
too.
I think what you ended up liking and the things you were pointing out there were when the show becomes very meta in
Hmm.
certain ways. Like the jokes you're making about, let's say, like not showing the whole musical number that a character would go into, or
Sure.
showing the reality of someone doing a reminiscence and how is that doing in terms of way time works and activity. It's the show kind of commenting on the form in which film and television works. And there's little quirky gags that kind of point out the irrationality of it, or how strange it really is, and how that is so intrusive into reality, and the characters are kind of aware of that
Yeah,
on
like
some level.
the actual like scene writing and the kind of situational comedy actually works I think fairly well. But anytime someone opens their fucking mouth, it tends to get really terrible in my opinion. I do not like I realize they're going for a generally unlikable family, in the sense that kind of that's what they're going for the characters, but they're really unlikable. Like really, like not even kind of like a basic. Oh, at least they're a family. Like no, no, they're barely that, and they're just not. Like their actual interaction just makes you like, man, you guys fucking suck. And they're not even like kind of like a normally with like antagonistic characters, there's a sort of, kind of affection towards them where people like really like the bad guys and stuff. Like for example, people love Mr. Burns as a character. He's a horrible person, but people really like him.
Well, because he's well observed, I think, and there's quirks in there, and there's a specificity to his character that makes him stand out in a lot of ways.
Sure.
He's a very well drawn, defined character,
and he's also well performed. I think as with these characters, they come like at least with Stan. Stan in particular comes less as a character and more like a caricature. I think Seth MacFarlane is a very good at doing different voices and kind of being consistent with those voices. But I think he's a terrible voice actor in the sense that he's doing like caricatures, like he's doing like an impression rather than an actual character.
as in. So I guess what you would say is that his performances are too broad to really have that kind of lived in feeling.
Maybe I think it's more the sense like his characters kind of are they're like a icon. They're like, symbolic of sort of thing. Like Peter Griffin is like symbolic of a fat idiot. That's it. He is fat idiot Tron. That's it.
And there's nothing beneath it.
There's nothing really else there. Like, maybe sometimes he's a nice guy and he likes, he likes Rhode Island. And he's like, no, yeah, he's still just fat idiot man. Fat idiot New Englander. That's it. There's nothing else to him.
I would kind of disagree with Stan in this case because I think over time, and I mean, you only have seen certain episodes of it.
I've seen other episodes beyond just these.
But I mean, some of the more recent ones, I'd say like 5th season on, you start seeing kind of certain issues with Stan that are very specific to Stan come up over and over and over again because they echo to the past. So like when you look at the Stan's food restaurant flashback, for example, they reference about how the father had abandoned them, essentially.
Yeah, and they touch on that again also in Blood and Cries Unto Heaven.
Yeah, and then there's a couple other episodes that kind of deal with the psychological trauma and the weird coping mechanisms that he has come up with because of that, and they've done episodes with him and how he relates to Steve, and they reference why Stan might have these types of complexes.
But daddy issues humor is like the second most common trope ever, basically.
I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying that it's at least there versus, of course, with
Family Guy does that one even too, though. Family Guy does it with his Catholic dad.
Kind of, but they've killed him off, and then they have never referred to it again.
Yeah.
Like, it's a psychological thing that doesn't really come up unless that dad character shows up or dies. In this one, they'll be able to they reference just, and also certain other episodes where it isn't directly referencing his dad, you'll see certain kind of daddy issues and other psychological trauma that he has had in the past kind of filter out in this way. I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying it's a light sketch. It's not a fully developed thing. It's like he is no Lisa Simpson.
Sure.
So, but he has it there more so than...
He's not even a Homer Simpson, though.
No. Well, he might be closer to a more latter-day Homer than he is kind of the older Homer.
We don't talk about those.
We don't talk about later-day Homer. I mean, when you were saying Mr. Burns, I go, some of the more recent episodes with Mr. Burns, they just completely lost that kind of depth to it.
We don't talk about those.
The series that shall not be named, essentially.
So the thing is that with those characters, though, or with like, Stan and stuff, like, it's hard for you to have a real pathos when so many of the episodes, and honestly, when they do the best is when they completely abandon the pretense of it and just kind of go nuts, with the stuff where they kind of use them as actors and then, doing other type of stuff where they're kind of using it to mess around. Those are the most interesting episodes where they kind of abandon all semblance of reality. And the thing is that they aren't able to keep the kind of a suspension of disbelief with it, kind of like Futurama does. Like, Futurama does a lot of really dumb and goofy stories and the characters and stuff, but there's still a lot of emotional pathos attached to the characters. Like, you still care for Fry, even though he's just, he's a dumb idiot most of the time and is used for a lot of dumb idiot gags. Like, they do a lot of interesting stuff with them because the character writing's a lot better. The acting's a lot better. It's that sort of stuff where they're able to get away with that. But, maybe we should kind of go into some of these...
whether or not that is a fatal flaw, I think is where we kind of differ. Where I'm like, with this show, I'm okay as long as I feel that the character beats and the humor and some of the meta humor works. That's for me is fine enough. At least it's entertaining. I'm never going to call the show high art. I'm never going to even have it in the same stratosphere as a show like Futurama in terms of the range and depth of emotion entertainment it can have.
See,
I'm just saying that in
the thing
terms
is,
of
I'm not.
just humor, I enjoy this show.
See, I'm not saying it's like even a bad show. I'm saying it is a like it is the worst kind of show. It is a milk toast show. It is, it is the thin gruel. You can subsist on it, but really you don't need to. You could probably find something else to do with your time. Humanity as a whole, come on. We can do this. We can make this happen. Let's all just start reading books again. It'll be great.
Yeah. Well, let's go, I guess, into. So you wanted to go a couple of the episodes that we had watched.
Well, yeah, let's just go over some of these episodes in general because, man. So, Dungeons and Wagons is the first one I watched of the ones that you selected for me. And this one is basically an episode with two plot lines, as they do.
Well, as a lot of shows do, they call them A plots and B plots.
Yeah. Well, though here it's kind of like a C plot and a C plot. But
okay.
So the two plots here are just the fact that Stan is super generic about everything. He wants to go to the same restaurant. Francine wants more excitement in his life. Stan refuses to race a guy on the street, and then she gets into car racing to get excitement again.
That to me was very much the B plot of the episode. I felt that and the reason I selected the episode was because I liked the fact that they did an entirely different animation style.
See, that was neat. I'll give you that.
That's what I mean by the reason I kind of a little bit like the show is that they're willing to just go, you know what? We are going to take this concept and we're going to fucking commit to it. And
sure.
They do it visually.
And I think the production staff on here are pretty damn good. Like they even with like the car racing stuff on here. We'll get to the other plot in a second.
Yeah.
Even that is like overtly like a Fast and Furious parody stuff and like kind of car racing cartoon or film rather kind of car racing type culture type stuff, and that was kind of neat, like kind of the goofy cuts of Francine on the car as they go around. Like visually there's some interesting stuff in here.
It's well directed, and I think it's they know how to adapt the style to what they're making fun of, and I think they there's a sense of observation, at least visually, to what they're doing, as we'll see much later in I think the last episode we talk about. But in this one, this episode has like an MMO game that Steve is playing, and when they're in the MMO, the drawing style has changed completely. It doesn't look anything like, pretty much like anything that's on TV at the moment.
No.
For that sequence. I kind of wish there was a show that looked like that, because there's some genuinely really good character models in there, but it's just, but the way that online MMO feels to those characters, it's this very like painted backgrounds, very somewhat realistic proportions, high fantasy, a lot of anime influence in it. They just completely departed in there, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean that aspect of it was kind of cool, but when you actually go into what's involved in that plot line, it is super lame. Like Francine's boyfriend is a fucking, or not Francine, what's her name? Haley's boyfriend is like fucking awful. Basically, he's like super like kind of pushy and touchy.
Well,
he's a
burnout with. Yeah, he's a needy burnout.
which let me tell you is hilarious. Hilarious. Yeah, I am laughing here. So she breaks up with him, which does have an interesting kind of visual gag with the fact that she breaks up with him on the phone from the room over.
Yeah.
But then he walks in the room and that kind of thing. Like this is how dumb
she
he is.
hung up.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. But then they had the whole thing with Steve's video game and he's being like an asshole about it. So Jeff, Haley's boyfriend, ends up getting into the game. Haley, of course, as a girl's like, oh, he's not interested in me anymore. I got to get him back. And the fish character, the ever important fish German character.
Yes, Klaus.
So is used for all the time for important things.
Yeah.
Did they ever do anything with him, by the way?
There are a few episodes that I think use him well, but he's very rarely used well. There's one where he tries to, what is it? So Roger, the alien character, eventually, so once they stopped having him confined just to the house, and he has all these different personas that have different jobs and activities, there's a couple recurring ones, and one of them is a psychologist called Dr. Penguin,
Mm.
basically named after the clothing brand. And he is basically a psychologist for the entire family. And the episode he's in, or at least one of the main episodes he's in, has his advice is to just continue lying to each other about their problems. And Klaus wants to take over that position and try to fix the family as opposed to just making them lie to each other. So that he does have like a couple episodes where they're focused around him and they can be good episodes, but most of the time they use him as kind of a little bit of a meta commentary thing, but really the bad German jokes and the bad one-liners they give him are when they use him the most, and
Because
it's
those are
usually the least.
really dumb.
Yeah, and those
It's
are the
like
least good
it's like
jokes.
it's like seeing episodes with him. You'd think like, oh, is he a former Nazi war criminal? And it's like, oh no, he's some guy apparently, some like sports guy from the '80s. He was a German athlete that they locked up for they transferred his mind into a fish. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
The
so
series,
what's
I
with
think,
all the
initially
Nazi
was
jokes?
not
Then?
well
It's like, what?
planned, and they had to just kind of come up with what they could out of it.
They could
I
totally excise him from the entire thing, and it would look like it would accomplish nothing in terms of impacting it.
Yeah, pretty much. I
But
mean,
anyways, basically, it's like, oh, if you want your boyfriend back, you have to beat him. You have to beat, him in the
well,
game,
get him to stop hanging out with Steve, essentially.
get him to stop hanging out with Steve. And then she kills Steve, kind of humorously by saying his name backwards
In the game. Yeah,
in the game.
That's his powerful, super powerful power fantasy character. His one weakness is his name backwards.
Yep. And so basically, then that leads to she has to team up with her ex-boyfriend to resurrect Steve because Steve is really sad that his character died. Steve, who had been completely the entire episode a huge asshole to everybody. And
He gets his comeuppance, essentially.
Yeah, and we're supposed to expect it now to feel pathos about this. Like, oh, actually, that was really important to him. It's really important that he gets the character back. And it's like,
So he
not
can
really.
continue being an asshole again.
So,
although
yeah.
luckily, I think they do a great way of tying the bow on that.
That was the thing is that the end of episode gag where someone just immediately kills him with the thing.
Well,
that
one of
was
the previous
super,
people that he was being a dick to. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that was he had it coming, but at the same time, it was super like transparent. That was what was going to immediately happen.
Oh yeah.
Like,
But
it was,
it does wrap a nice bow on. Okay, well, he got his character back, and he's probably going to return to being an asshole again. But then it turns out no, you can't fix that problem. The whole thing's gonna recycle itself.
yeah, the things like this is like a good example. These early episodes, like, man, everybody fucking sucks.
Yeah. Again,
It's
like
like
I
it's
said,
like
this is an earlier episode.
But it's like Francine is like oh she's not being clear with Stan about what's going wrong, and it's like oh she's asshole, and she's like random's like bet all of our money on this car race that you lost coincidentally so we can have this plot line, And it's like
Yeah.
oh that's it, it's like oh I'm just gonna go steal her, and then that's it. I stole her
Yeah.
back.
Well,
from
again,
these
it's
guys.
those sitcom-y elements I think that you don't end up liking a lot of.
Yeah, but the sitcom elements also suck. They're not very good examples of that.
Yeah. So, do you want to move on to the next episode, Stanny Slickers 2?
Please. Yeah, that one was also just kind of contrived.
A
to
little
me.
bit. The reason I like certain parts of it, I love the Schoolhouse Rock parody.
Hmm.
They changed the art style for that one too, and I think it's also it's actually a really good explanation about Iran Contra. So I thought that was pretty funny that they put in an eerily accurate and well done satire on that political event. But
Yeah,
yeah,
the episode also
that is its own thing. The rest of the story, it's an earlier season one, and there's a few good gags in there.
Stans
like-
wants to get a legacy, so he's convinced with digging up
Oliver North's
hidden gold, which turns out to be real because jokes. And so he digs up everything and is just a huge asshole, and everybody like the whole thing about Stan.
Well, he looks crazy. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Sure, but Stan, you need to be a father to your family, and it's like, oh, what's the thing he needs to stop there? His daughter's getting piercings, and his son wants to fuck a vacuum.
Well, he's trying to build a sex robot. Yeah.
He wants to fuck a vacuum.
Yes.
So it's like great, wonderful, and then the B plot is that Roger wants to get sexually harassed to get money, which is hilarious.
Yep, like I said, there's
Hilarious.
some problematic elements, and especially in these earlier ones.
It's like so ultimately Roger gets his sexual harassment money by using different kind of personas to sexually harass himself by pretending to be one character, walk out of the room, come back in as the other character, like, oh, that person sexually harassed me. Walks back to, no, I did that, and he gets his money.
Yep, but not very much. He only ends up getting like $500 or something like that,
I think it was like $90,000 actually.
or something like that. So it was a
The
much
the
lower.
ultimate payout for the gag there is the fish going like, oh, you want to, oh, that actually worked. Can I get some money? I don't loan money to friends. And then just like the awkward hold, and that's it. They're going for the awkward gag there. And it's
Yeah,
kind of like, oh, you could not think of anything else to do here. This is your way of wrapping up that gag, huh?
yeah, it didn't work out so well.
Huh.
I like the odd visual gag of using the donkey as ballast.
Yes. That was
There,
amusing.
the him digging through the he when he first starts digging, he literally just starts. He doesn't take the floor rug off, and they mentioned like, why did you dig through the floor rug? And he thinks so when he breaks through the floor, he's like, oh my god, I see it. And it turns out it's like, oh wait, no, it's the basement. So he didn't
Hmm.
start at the basement. He just literally starts digging where he was just standing. There's a nice visual gag there. There's the thing about in order to get him back up, I think it was like the foam, the guy that just sells foam, and he's like, maybe you could put foam in there and lift him up. John, just stop. I have so much foam and a family to feed. Just give this to me.
Yeah, that was pretty. And then the obvious end of episode gag was really obvious with the fact like, oh, you could just, everybody's immediately thinking, the audience is clearly thinking after his, mind collapses and the gold's left underneath because, of course, the fact like, oh, couldn't they just dig up the gold again? And then, the firefighter there is like, yeah, when these guys go to sleep, I'm going to go steal that gold.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, you
It's kind
called
of like an
attention to that.
early start on having kind of a meta humor awareness, but it wasn't executed as well as it is much later. So like you're seeing the starts of a little bit of the non sequitur and some visual gags and some meta humor at that point, but it hadn't really evolved yet to where it works well, at least to me. So then the next episode is the vacation goo.
The Vacation Goo had a funny 1/3 of an episode, and it was
Yeah.
right up front.
Well, to me, I thought for me the best line is Francine shouting, "I'm in the goo!" as she jumps off the edge of a boat.
Yeah. Then the thing is that, okay, so the whole thing with this episode is that Francine's sad that they keep on not having family dinner on Sundays. So Stan says, "Oh, let's go on vacation and have family time together." And it turns out that all the vacations that they had were in CIA supplied, vacation tanks full of goo, where he'd have them go in the tank and have a great vacation, and then
And
he'd
he would
go
just get to do his own thing.
and
Yeah.
go and do sports, watch sports with the fish. Which,
Yeah.
in and of itself, I think that was pretty funny. And the constant fact that they keep on having actual vacations and they keep on turning out to be in the goo, anyways.
With the other family members realizing, wait, this, it's like, wait, I want my alone time too. So I'm just like, yeah. So that, but again, I
Those
like,
were funny. Like,
yeah,
that aspect of it was funny. But then when they had the actual vacation, and then they have like the hilarious subplot of the pedophile wanting to rape Steve, the
is
female pedophile wanting to force herself on him, and that's
oh
the gag.
the cruise ship activities director thing.
Yeah,
Where, yeah,
it's like, oh, this has to be a dream because this attractive woman wants to have sex with my child. This must be some sort of fake thing. It must be in the goo. Let's jump off the boat. We all jumped off the boat. Did you tell the boat to stop? Nope. Oh, we're on an island of
Well, I
of
thought this. I thought oh, and there's the B story about I think Roger wanting to be the best actor.
yeah, where he's trying to get himself to cry, and it's only after he gets I think
Yeah.
it's gets raped in Mexico
No,
is
he
when
doesn't actually do it. He's about to, I think, because he originally gets a part on some kind of soap opera, but when they realize he can't actually cry, he throws a huge fit. Then he becomes a person on the ship just doing really crappy entertainment, and so it's basically him going down the ladder until eventually he's stuck in kind of like a strip joint, and then even in the strip joint he then just basically essentially is about to be sold off to some creepy awful person, and then when he cries he gets out of it, and then
he immediately
that's
leaves
the
and
end,
immediately walks also back into the strip club. That's the gag.
because he suddenly had a bunch of money.
Yep.
Yep, so he's now going to become a patron as opposed to a performer.
Hmm.
So that's the way that one worked out. But again, then the main plot, Francine, because she sees Roger and she sees the family actually being together, she becomes suspicious. She tries to jump off the boat to prove that she's in the goo. Turns out nope, they're actually there. there's a bit of a most dangerous game kind of parody.
Because of course, well, the second that they ended up on an island in this girl's mansion, like, I immediately thought, oh, it's gonna be a most dangerous game parody because of course it's the most obvious damn thing in the world. So go
Yep.
there, it's like, oh, well, that's part of the gag that they're going for, admittedly,
Yeah.
the fact that that is, but it's also just kind of lame.
So like the joke is that the show goes, "Oh man, doing this would be really cliche. Here it is. Look at the cliche we did."
Oh, the
And that's
cliche
not
wasn't
enough
actually a
to
cliche, but it
yeah.
still happened. Like we still had to sit through that, guys. So
Yeah.
they basically chased it on the most dangerous game thing. The activities director who wants to have sex with their child at random basically dies because they needed to move to another gag. Like, oh, maybe we can use this leaf to get water. Up, the thing immediately collapses on her and she dies. It's like, oh, we got to eat her. And
Yeah, cuz they're trapped in a cave.
because they're trapped in the cave and they basically, oh, she's an organ donor, so it's fine. That gag is kind of funny, but the actual
Yeah.
execution of it is not that good. And also the fact, like, did they establish, like, what was the whole point of her being there as a character? Like, what is her point in the overall plot here? Is the fact that
She was there
is she
just so
there to
that way
be
the family could do the very gallows horrible family dinner at the end.
and
Because
then they
that was really what it was. I think they had to work with okay at the first part of the episode. So again, there's an attempted structure there to kind of tie things up. So the whole thing is family dinner. In this way, they wanted to get her. So Francine gets her wish of a family dinner, but it's them eating another human corpse instead.
and then they're able to justify it on the basis that she's inherently a terrible person because she is, a child rapist.
Yeah, although Steve seems to really want it for some reason.
Well, because that's how
Yeah,
teens work.
are portrayed on TV. Yes. But
So
I think her purpose there is really just a kind of a Steve joke, and then also they needed someone essentially to die in that situation, so that way they could do the very gallows. She gets her wish, but not in the way she would have ever imagined it to be, because it turns out the entire thing was not a real dangerous game thing, but it was a paintball game.
no, it was a most dangerous game themed,
Island
resort.
resort, yeah. So, but it turns out it was paintball because there's this whole scene where they all essentially look like they all got executed,
Yep,
and but the horror of the fact that it wasn't even necessary
yep.
kind of adds to this kind of very gallows humor. So then next episode we jump ahead. So I kind of skipped a few seasons and went to
Thank God.
yes. So I got to one of the ones I like a lot is Stan's Food Restaurant.
Hmm.
So this is one where Stan and Francine go out to restaurants, and he just constantly criticizes everything. And the reason ends up being that when he was a kid and his dad left him, the mother took him to this restaurant and gave him kind of like the best time of his life, and nothing has been able to reach that pinnacle. There's a couple good gags there. I love the took me to the best place, and there it shows a shot of like the Disneyland sign, and then it pans down and goes is too far away and really expensive, and then pans down to the actual restaurant that they go to.
And that gag didn't do anything for me.
Okay,
The
I
the
thought that was
restaurant and the location constantly exploding. I like that.
that was a really good gag, and then they do it again.
Yeah, where
Turns
the restaurant immediately explodes after he leaves, and then they go back
I'll
there
always
as a
be
kind of
there for you, Stan. And then it blows up, and the guy so they do this other great visual thing. It's so subtle. The guy that kind of is the person that parades him through the restaurant and lets him do what he wants, and kind of ends up becoming like looks like he's going to be a replacement father figure. They have him with this prominent red ring on his hand, and when the restaurant explodes, a hand with that red ring lands on Stan's balloon that he's holding and pops it. Like there's that great little detail to
uh-huh.
just really drive home how goddamn traumatizing it is. And so Francine is like, hey, why don't you make your own restaurant? Like you're always criticizing it, kind of reclaim your memories. It's kind of a nice gesture. And so but in order to do it, he has to team up with Roger, who's able to kind of accomplish a lot of these things on a whim.
We never called attention to the fact that Roger's a space alien.
Yes.
By the way, that has
Yeah.
almost no relevance to anything ever.
Only a couple times.
You
Like
could just
there's
replace him with I don't know, like
a
Mr. Magoo, and he could do disguises, and it'd be like the same character.
yeah, I think the space alien thing is just kind of apart from everything. I like the fact that he has this whole world of characters that interact with each other and reality, and no one really questions it after a while. It's kind of funny that way. So in this one, he kind of dresses up like Gordon Ramsay. I think he's basically a Gordon Ramsay caricature, right down to the way they did the eyebrows.
Mhm.
And he and Stan seemingly team up to build his restaurant, but it turns out Roger the whole time is trying to build his own Laotian restaurant, and he kind of betrays Stan in the end. But then, Stan finally turns that around, opens his own restaurant, and they kind of end up doing this kind of competition between the two.
Yeah, and his restaurant's a huge success until Roger burns down both
Both,
restaurants.
yeah, for to get out of the situation.
So I think the funniest gag in that entire thing is the minor aside involving the cow.
Oh yes, they do that.
Where they go to the farm for getting the organically sourced vegetables, and they see the
Or
cow.
his Captain Crunch tempura.
Yeah, yeah, and they see the cow. It's like, oh, that cow looks sick, man. And you should look at it. It's like, oh no, she's pregnant. And then Roger insists, like, you call me when she's about to give birth. You let me know. Trust me. Here's my home phone number, my cell number. And they completely forget about it for basically for a while. And then they have the whole confrontation moment where Stan realizes that Roger's making his restaurant, not
Yeah.
Stan's restaurant. And then they get the phone call in the middle of it, and then they're like, oh. And
They
they
drop
immediately
everything.
go to them in the barn crying as the cow gives birth about how beautiful it is, And then
They drive home in silence. They open up
smiling
the
at
door
each
for
other.
each other, and then Roger goes right back to the
Yeah,
argument.
that was that's an example of how they're really good at doing kind of the scene comedy is pretty good.
Breaking the form.
Sure.
Essentially,
Like
yeah.
that sort of stuff was really good. But the actual, like, a lot of the dialogue involving stuff, like the kind of dialogue jokes involving them,
The other joke that they repeat is, so Francine, in order to inspire Stan to actually build his own restaurant, she drives back to the location of where the restaurant used to be, and it's now like a nunnery. And while she tries to use it as like this great inspiration thing, it also explodes because the entire thing is like, they should really stop building here. I think it's like a gas leak or something like that.
yeah, that was pretty funny. Not
And then the other gag I liked was in the bank when Roger does this like fake hold up thing as a part of an inspirational speech, and there's a woman in the background who's like, "Oh my god!" and she's this very loud person. And then when everything calms down again, she maintains that same level of volume for just something really everyday, just something small like that. I found really funny for some reason.
But then the B plot there was kind of dumb. Remember
I
what the B
barely
plot was?
remember it.
That's where Steve meets the new hot girl who just moved out of school, got kicked out of her previous school for having too much sex.
Yeah,
And then she invites him over to her house, to have sex, essentially. And it's like, oh, you have to bring someone else with you for my friend, and her friend turns out to be a doll.
yeah.
So it's basically like, oh, her creepy doll obsession, and she wants to have sex with her. And how can he get his friend to deal with the doll? And it leads to like a plot where they decide to hang the doll and write a suicide note for it.
He tries to maintain this strange reality that the girl has about the doll. So she thinks the doll got impregnated. So they go through all the motions of like even taking her to like a Planned Parenthood with the doll. I have to say though, I really like Curtis Armstrong, who plays the character of Snot. I love his voice acting in general because he's in a lot of different things that he's been in. I just like his voice. It sounds great. But it's one of those B plots that I don't like because again it has some, it's that whole problematic aspects. There's some kind of, there's a grossness to it that I'm definitely not a big fan of. There's a sexism that runs in a lot of these shows that I don't enjoy at all. But the A plot I really like with Stan and his restaurant.
Yeah, that was enjoyable enough.
I like some of the gags of the horrible dishes he came up with.
Yeah.
Those were pretty good.
Though a lot that overall plot, I think, would be better as like a. Is there actually a Simpsons episode that's almost exactly this? It feels like there is.
There's been a lot of ones where characters open up like a restaurant of some sort.
I mean, this seems like it feels borderline the Moe's restaurant.
Oh, when he does the family restaurant thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a little bit, but the motivations are different.
Sure.
In this one, it's a much more Stan coming to terms with something and kind of living out a dream, versus for Moe, it was kind of an opportunistic thing.
Sure.
I mean, I think they're both actually really good episodes. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
But this one I like because of the A plot with Stan. I thought was really good, and it's nice that they kind of had a somewhat psychological basis for the motivation for why he's doing this. the ending doesn't work out very well. It's not a satisfying ending. It's kind of funny,
Yeah, I
but
think it worked out fine. I mean,
but
it's always it always all these sort of things with like, oh, Roger being an asshole stuff always feels kind of weird in the sense that like
it's a bit easy.
realistically speaking, if you look at it, it's like, oh, wouldn't they just, fucking, not interact with Roger again? Like he's their friend and family member ostensibly. I mean, again, he's a space alien. But like you'd think that they can only kind of use him as antagonist, figure only so often before it kind of loses a lot of the kind of like, oh, when you try pulling him as a protagonist, as part of the family, it doesn't work then.
There's episodes that do deal with that, and some of them more successful than others to kind of explain why they keep him around, and also why at the same time they revile him, or why they almost fear him on some level. Like they could, if they tried to kick him out, they couldn't. Like they couldn't accomplish it even if they really wanted to, because mechanically he would find a way.
Hmm.
There's episodes around that. But yeah, I get what you mean. Like I think that issue comes back to one of the bigger issues with these types of shows in general is the reset button, meaning the show always knows it can reset back to the way the characters are. So no matter how awful these people behave, or how good they behave, or what lesson they may learn for that point, it's kind of undone for the sake of just, well, we need a blank slate to kind of do a new storyline on.
Speaking of reset button, Family Land.
So Familyland I included just because it did a couple neat little conceptual things where it kind of turns into a little bit of another show at one point, but not quite.
See, that aspect of it was interesting. The issue is that that aspect of it was almost more interesting than the show itself.
Yeah, where they break. I almost wanted to see a movie where a family breaks into these different little kingdoms and it becomes a war between them. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, well, basically kind of explain it's like it's Disney World essentially. They go to Disney World, a place for family. It is a
With
family land.
Roy family, they do this great.
Yeah, and the family immediately after getting into the park, as they do in all these, immediately goes to do their own things. It's like, oh, I want
Whereas
to spend
Francine, yeah, wants to
Francine
stick
wants to spend
together.
time with the family, and she's all sad about it in front of a statue of Roy family, who, like Walt Disney, is in fact cryogenically frozen. Except here, he's actually alive and conscious. He bursts out of the statue and puts the park into like a lockdown mode where there's steel walls everywhere, and then they're
Because
all
he's unhappy with the way the park has turned out. Like he goes like, "Oh, look at these people. They're selfish. They're not together." And then he sees these two people of different race dating, and he's like, "Oh!" It's basically kind of pointing out a lot of that Disneyland itself has a kind of problematic basis upon a lot of it. A lot
the
of
history
the
did.
history behind a lot of things, and some of the things they've had to more recently kind of change to kind of get rid of that aspect of Southern culture that it kind of used to romanticize.
Well, yeah, they have the whole Splash Mountain thing where
Oh
it's like,
yeah.
oh, it's a giant racism metaphor, kind of like, well, Splash
Well,
Mountains.
it was like, oh, it was like 10 minutes of just unedited racism.
And then, of course, the German fish is really into it because you see
Well,
Germans
German.
are entirely racist because
Yeah, they
remember
go to
World War
that well too
II?
often. But the what's kind of cool, so in the lockdown, the each family member kind of becomes a leader of the different lands. So one is like a Wild West land, one is a fantasy land, a Toontown, and Tomorrowland. And so they become leaders of the kingdom, and they're all trying to kind of, they end up warring with each other over the limited resources they have, which are basically Dippin' Dots, that they call them Trippin' Balls, and that's their only source of food at this point, or really old churros. And that part becomes kind of interesting,
Hmm.
seeing the, because all the people start adapting the personality and the style of the land that they're in. So like all the people start dressing up as wild western people, other ones dress up as like space people. The kids all, there's a land of just children, which is the Toontown one.
And also Patrick Stewart.
Yeah. Oh, and then Haley does her kind of feminist retouching of. There's actually a really good bit where Haley does that feminist critique about princesses, and that a lot of those stories end with, well, the whole story wraps up and it's positive because the girl gets a man, and she
Yeah,
does
where
this
the
great
princess
critique.
the princess says to the little girls like, oh, if you want to be a princess,
Do
you have to
whatever
do
a man tells you to
even
make
if
him
it doesn't
happy.
seem like a thing like a princess would do, because he'll find a princess that'll do it for him.
Yeah, and I thought that was a, yes, it's kind of horrible, but at the same time,
Yeah,
I felt that it was done as a critique.
sure.
by so again, it's one of those things where is it okay to do that type of thing as a form of critique, or are you just perpetuating it? So that's kind of a little bit of question there.
I think that was
But
fine.
I thought it
That
was actually a pretty good critique, and I ended up liking that gag because they even go a step further. It's like anything he wants, but she ends up creating a. So when the whole thing goes to shit, she ends up creating the opposite, where it's a, kind of an Amazonian style thing with those
mm,
princesses.
yeah. I think that the gags involving Patrick Stewart in that episode were also pretty good, where he's literally there just because he's a family file.
Yeah,
He's just kind of staring at them, just kind of like being Patrick Stewart. Because Patrick Stewart, you can basically shove in anything, and if he's willing to act it, he'll do a good job.
yeah,
He's
and he
kind
does
of
a great. So in this series he plays
he's a
Stan's
consummate
boss.
actor.
Yeah, well, he plays Stan's boss, Avery Bullock, who is he's basically Patrick Stewart, but he heads the CIA,
Hmm.
and he's a source of a lot of really good jokes and just some really good performances because he commits to it no matter what it is.
Yeah, like thing with Patrick Stewart, like he never as opposed to Seth MacFarlane doing like Stan, it doesn't feel like a caricature, even though the character clearly is kind of caricature type thing.
Well, he's unrealistic in a lot
He's
of ways.
unrealistic in a lot of ways, but the way he is so good at acting that you never get the impression of that. Like you
Well,
can
there's a gravitas to him just
sure
naturally. Yeah. So in the end, Francine is able to unite the family again
with cookies.
with cookies and reminds them of who they are. But this is one of those episodes where the gallows humor is really intense.
Yeah,
So
there were
like,
some funny gags where the actual fight scene breaks out. Where one of the gags I liked was with the whole like well, actually some of the Tomorrowland jokes I think involving Roger were kind of funny in the sense like he goes there, it's like, oh, it's trying to be a shitty impression of like what space is like, and he goes there,
yeah,
it's like, oh my god, it's like they got it 100%.
exactly
All
right.
the shitty flying the shitty flying cars on rails is
And the rings around everything and
it's
basically
exactly like
what the
home.
1950s thought the future was going to be. And he's like, oh my god, they actually got. I thought that was a good gag when he realizes that the laser guns are fake, so
Or
that they're
or
not actually going to be
Or the thing
useful
with,
in the
or the
battle.
thing where he keeps having the conversation with them on the space ride that has to go up, and then he overshoots somebody. It's like, oh, it can't go backwards. You're gonna have to let me do another cycle before
Yeah,
I
he's
can
trying
talk
to
to
do
you.
it for dramatic effect, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, or like when they're having the fight scene, and like one of the spaceman's helmets is yanked off, and his head explodes.
Yeah, like he's on
Even though
space.
it's
That
a
was
fake,
so good.
that was pretty funny.
But
The
I
stuff
think that
involving not Walt Disney was pretty good.
yeah, I liked also when they get the lifetime passes and Steve is like, "It was worth it. It was all worth it." And then but in that shot behind him are all these TV screens showing the horrible death and devastation that is going on behind him.
Yeah, but the other thing with the ending though is also they're just walking in the park. It's like we're never gonna talk about this again, right? Like, nope.
Wow, there's a lot of blackout dates on these lifetime passes.
Yeah.
Like the well then I mean and then it turns out like at least realistically the park is never reopened.
Well,
Like
they actually say like then the park would never was open. The park was closed down to make a monument of those who had died and all the lawsuits and whatnot.
yeah. So I thought that was a pretty good ending for that one. So that around Stan Food's restaurant at Familyland are some of the ones where I go, okay, it's starting to find its voice, and yes, it can't be realistic, and the characters aren't necessarily that depth, don't have depth, but at least they get some good gags.
See,
So I'm
Familyland though, like the base kind of idea behind it, it's an example of this episode would be so much better with different characters in it, I think.
some extent, yeah, because again, most of the stuff we ended up liking were
It's like
kind of just the
okay.
gags.
Imagine this episode, but replace everybody with the Futurama cast. Like I know that the whole family pretense of it wouldn't hold up,
Well, the
but the
Futurama cast are like a family, so the idea is to be together in that
sure.
regard.
But
So
I'm just saying, like that sort of thing, like it would work a lot better because the performances are a lot better and the characters are a lot more likable, and the
yeah,
pathos at the end would make feel more genuine. Here, it doesn't. No, I don't know. It feels super transparently just no, because in fact they don't really come together. They're just like, oh, we really like her cookies. That's it. That's the joke. They made that joke in the earlier part of the episode. Like, oh, they only pay attention because they like her cookies.
well, I the other reason I like this episode is because it's willing to have an A plot and no real B plot.
Sure.
The entire thing, and that's one of those things where I
God
go, it's
forbid.
like it actually does pretty well. Like even the parts where it cuts to the other family members, it's still a part of telling a larger story within the episode.
Thing is that that's not that audacious though.
No, I know, but I'm just
I mean,
saying
it's different
it was
for
nice to
it's different for
see.
them, sure, but it's not like what? No B plot.
Yeah,
Jeez, how could they? They are. They're
Well, it
really
shows a bit more
going.
focus than a show like Family Guy, because again, it's hard to separate it from that Family Guy universe and that Family Guy voice that a lot of these shows and spin-off shows have had.
I don't spend that much time thinking about Family Guy, and that makes it very easy.
I hate watch it. It's on, well, it's on the block that has new Bob's Burgers episodes, so I end up sitting through a lot of that stuff,
You
and
done
I
fucked
kind of,
up.
yeah. Well, at least Bob's Burgers, but anyway. So the next episode that we watched, Ricky Spanish. And I liked this one just because or the reason I picked it is because it's one of those ones where they examine kind of in a bit of a meta way the consequences of Roger's personas.
Hmm.
And I just thought there's some really good little things, like the way they do that running gag of Ricky Spanish, where they would cut back to whenever
That
they
I
say
liked a
his
lot, where
name,
they kept on
and
doing like Ricky Spanish, and they cut away from doing something nasty to somebody.
to show why he's such a hated person. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought there's great little again that formal break, that break from reality a little
like I
bit.
said, like the show has a lot of really good stylistic stuff, and the actual shots themselves seem to be well directed. But then, like a lot of the
You just
character
hate the
stuff,
characters, yeah. I mean, and I think that's
and
totally a
I think
valid
like
critique.
this one like also didn't really work for me at all in the sense that it had Steve being like, "Oh, Steve is super optimistic and a nice guy." It's like, no, he's not. He's a fucking asshole.
Yeah,
Like, where the fuck did
they
this
had to
come
do it.
from? That like
Well,
he's now being fucking Lisa Simpson or some shit. Like
yeah,
where the fuck did this
that's
come from?
yeah, I agree. I think they made him that way because they needed someone in the family to fill that role, and I think Haley would be the only other character that could maybe do it, but Steve and Roger are the only ones that really pair off a lot in other episodes, so they had to make Steve
Haley
into a
didn't
much
even
more
show up in this
sympathetic.
episode,
No, well, they make a joke about it too, I think,
did they? I don't remember.
but
So this one was like the whole thing was basically like Roger has this persona who's an asshole to everybody, and then Steve convinces him to try to redeem that character or that persona. And so the thing is that though under that persona, he actually ends up basically using this entire thing as a chance to do a heist and kind of set up Steve for it to get arrested, which he does and
to be
spends
the
time in
fall
jail.
guy, yeah. But
And,
I
and
like to. There's a bunch of gags in it that are really good. I like the don't make a sound and then one of the crates falls over and it's clown sweaters and it makes that honking noise.
yes, the whole thing that they're doing heists for clothing is funny. The
The
fact
Werner
that
Herzog
the
ending
fact that
is
it turns
great.
out to be a Werner Herzog episode is also pretty funny. Like it's like they has the Werner. I think that's a Werner Herzog impersonator doing the
No,
ending.
because Werner Herzog does a lot of these shows. He'll do them.
Was it actually Werner Herzog? I guess.
I think it was because he did an episode of the Boondocks too.
Hmm. That I think worked pretty well. The kind of like the oh, it's a very heavy-handed Werner Herzog style, ending. They think or kind
With
of
some kind of
metaphor.
poignant symbol of a butterfly in a jar that used to contain farts.
Yeah, or yeah, and it's it's dying there. Even though it hatched its cocoon, it's stuck in the jar.
While
Someone else.
Steve is in prison.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hate Ricky Spanish. I like the fact that he echoed the same thing that the other character
sure.
did. There's a bunch of really good side gags. Again, one of the ones I really like is this one character that they just kind of create almost like an SNL kind of character called Jenny, who just exists to be this awful person. And it's not that she herself is inherently funny. It's just this odd tonal break from it, and just I don't know, something about it. She feels like a character out of an SNL skit that just appeared in the show. For some reason, it just tickled my fancy. I just thought it was really funny. I have no idea why. It's
How
one of
did
those things where sometimes I don't have a justification for why I find certain things funny.
how did you feel about the B plot?
I don't even remember it.
It's where they get Tunji, their sponsor child
Oh,
from Africa, shows up from Nigeria.
there's a couple good gags in there
I
when
like I think the fact the gag I really liked for that is more the fact that they're just really annoyed by how enthusiastic he is rather than the fact that
he's
he's
so
there.
positive. He sucks. Like
And they leave him like, well, I miss him. It's like he was so positive, everything. He really would enjoyed this, and then they go and get him back after they abandon him at Costco.
yeah.
Costco, and they get him back, and they're immediately like, God, this guy's he's at it again. God
And
damn
they
it,
just bail out of the car,
car,
and
which
they
is
leave it going.
which is
Well, I
really
like
obvious, but it was still funny that bit.
when they start calling for his name and they just start completely going off on the deep end.
Oh
when
yeah,
they're calling
where
for each other.
they keep on doing different cuts away of like how they're like, oh,
Tanji, Mr. and Mrs. Lady, and they do just they
him
start
playing with dolls of them all of a sudden, like, wait,
and
what?
suddenly they're in space, and it's just this,
And
again,
suddenly
it's
they're
a
at
formal break. It's
and,
great.
yeah,
It's this
suddenly it's
weird.
Romeo and Juliet and that kind of stuff like that. Yeah.
And I like the one line he did is I finally ate enough food to make a whole poop. was kind of funny, just
Yep.
because it's a weird way to explain an amount of food. So
Oh,
again, like there's some great
actually,
little
one of the
gags.
dialogues I did like, one of the dialogue gags to kind of back up a bit in the restaurant episode, where they're talking, for some reason, they were making like a conversation point about. So I think Roger makes a metaphor about like dog poo involving like old
Oh
dog
no,
poo that
they,
turns
they they
white.
mentioned like it's like one of those white dog poos, and then he goes off on a tangent about it's like those are weird, aren't they? Like, do they come out that way? I think it's a fungus. Like, there's this
Oh
long
yeah, it's like, is that
aside,
fungus? Like, is it like it's like it's dark on the inside? Like, yeah, maybe. You know, it's like
like a
one of those
powdered
donuts.
donut.
It's like,
Ah,
oh,
now
you're
you're
just
making
making me
hungry.
hungry. See, that worked, but the thing is, like, that had nothing to do with the characters themselves. Like, that is
Yeah,
just like, hey, you wrote some good dialogue. These characters have nothing to do with it because this isn't the type of dialogue that these characters would probably actually have in the show. You just came up with a neat, kind of dialogue gag and just shoved it in there. You just packed it in. And it's like, oh, once
that's where it's
again,
oddly the show is at its strongest or at least funniest with those things. So again, like breaking with the form and calling attention to like the
breaking from the
absurdity of
characters.
television and movies and the way things are edited, just the artifice of television and movies inherently when it does those tricks, when it does the abstract gags, when it does like observational humor, and then when it does those little dialogue ticks. The weakness is definitely the characters.
See, they would almost be better off at that standpoint, either not having a returning cast or using the cast as actors in stories, essentially.
Which, as we come to this last one,
Which, yeah.
well, you would have liked then you would have liked an episode called Tearjerker, where the entire thing, the cast are essentially actors, and they change their roles for a James Bond parody,
Mm.
and it's pretty good. So that I think brings us to the last episode we watched, Blood Crieth unto Heaven, which is one of those concept episodes.
Yeah, so this is
Where
basically they're doing a play that they found, like, or that Patrick Stewart found in like a dumpster or something.
Well, no, there's a guy who is this apparently is prolific playwright who was a big fan of the show, and after he died, they found like 8 scripts of his,
And then
and
Patrick
this is
Stewart
the
ate
only
all of them except for
it,
one.
yeah, because he was out of sheer jealousy.
Yeah.
This was the only one he didn't eat out of sheer jealousy.
See, I like that because it's actually just Patrick Stewart there.
It's
just
live action Patrick
live action
Stewart.
Patrick Stewart. And, Patrick Stewart, it's kind of like you could do whatever with Patrick Stewart. That's like that's like, it almost feels cheap in the sense like, oh yeah, you have Patrick Stewart in here. Good
Well,
job.
also he's a
idiot.
well-known stage actor too.
Yeah, and
So
he works in this situation where they're like he acts like he's asleep. Like, no, I wasn't asleep. That was me just acting. He
Yeah.
winks. Kind of like Patrick Stewart's classy.
Yeah. Well, but I love the way they did this whole episode. So it commits to the fact that you're watching a stage play.
Mm-hmm.
So all the scene transitions and all the effects are the kind of things that you would have to figure out for a stage play version.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of show you the artifice of it at the same time. And it's kind of impressive that they kind of designed that production the way they did.
Sure.
So there's kind of a neat aspect to it,
and the whole fact that it's both a plot line about Stan and his dad issues, as well as also being just kind of a parody of how heavy-handed that this sort of play can get.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like take the negative excesses of American playwrights.
It's very much a parody of like a sort of death of a salesman type stories where it's
it's taking that kind of language, but kind of pointing out how a lot of people overdo it in a way.
Yeah, but the thing is that it's also not that, like, there's some interesting stuff with the story stuff and how it's presented, but the actual comedy of the episode isn't that funny. Like, there's not actually very much in the way of gags. They almost go a little.
For me, again, the reason I found
except
it so
for the fact
entertaining,
like clown fucking, that was the only real gag I had in there.
Again,
clown
for me,
fucking.
the thing I found is it wasn't one of those episodes that's kind of like laugh out loud funny to me, but I thought it was really successful in how well it was able to observe the thing it was satirizing. It to me, I just thought it was well done, rather than necessarily being funny.
Honestly, though, like the takeaway I had from this episode is like, man, I want to go to a play, like rather than like, man, that was a good episode of American Dad. It's like, that I actually almost prefer like the super cheesy, fake ass play that they're showing than the actual show that, it's kind of like, nope, you actually proved yourself wrong here, American Dad. I'd actually prefer to see the heavy handed ass, like, oh, super heavy sort of like, oh, you ruined this, your father, you ruined your father's life, and now you're going to ruin your son's, or your son's going to ruin your life by giving you the means to kill yourself, and that's going to ruin his life. And the chain goes on, and then the whole thing with the babies getting smothered. There's a lot of stuff going on here. It's kind of hard to summarize it.
Well, again, it's one of those things making fun of, like, we're going to put this dramatic thing for the sake of drama, which
Uh-huh.
sometimes I've been to kind of smaller plays where I go, oh God, there, you can see them trying really, it's trying too hard, essentially. I would disagree that I feel that this one, it doesn't hate plays. I think it's almost what I would call like a loving parody. Like it kind of acknowledges a little bit at the same time. It's hard to explain. I think it's not as hateful about plays as I
Sure.
think you're
Sure.
thinking it
Well, I
is.
don't think it's hateful. It's just that they're just kind of, I don't know, like the actual, like the things that American Dad brings to it isn't all that much. To, like, kind of like, oh, I get what they're going for. Like I get what they're going for. It's just like, I'm
Yeah,
cold here. Like a lot of the gags they go for is the fact that they'll occasionally say the word like cock, or TV acceptable level, rough language or something like a bitch. You're don't you dare call your mother a bitch or something type stuff. I don't know.
yeah,
Like it's kind of like really they couldn't do actual gags that much, so they kind of go for sort of cheap sort of stuff.
yeah.
They don't
Again,
they
for
don't
me, the
really they
gags
don't
were the stage stuff.
they
Again,
don't
like
make they
just
don't really
the
make a lot of parody stuff of stage goofiness because they could have done a lot of stuff that made fun of like kind of like like if you were a play type person you would find certain aspects that you could make parody type stuff of, but I didn't get the feeling that they were super cognizant of that sort of thing where they didn't go deep with it. I think they got more
Mm.
the feeling that they decided the very fact that they were doing a parody was gag enough.
Yeah, so like you felt that they borrowed the formal elements and they focused so much on that they never really scratched the surface, essentially. So
Well,
like
I think more
it was a
like
satire without necessarily digging much
it
deeper
was it
than.
was a satire of play of American plays, but it wasn't really a satire of plays, is what I'm saying. Like they could have done a lot
Yeah,
of stuff to satirize or do comedic kind of gags involving the very fact that there's a lot of stuff you can do in terms of how plays work in terms of sets and stuff that you could
yeah.
do like that sort of thing. Like they did a couple of these things like where he pulls like a hat behind him like or I think he vanishes like a set piece behind him between a
Oh, he
transition at
has
one
to
point.
run to the next set piece and take off the party hat that he had on.
Yeah, that worked, but there wasn't
I
enough of
like
that.
the weird things where they did this kind of, what's her name? The one that did the Lion King thing and then did that awful Spider-Man one.
I can't remember.
Joanna, is it Hemley? I think is her name. She does like these kind of strange puppety set pieces, and there's the one where they do this whole thing of the dad packing his bags, and they have people in like sock and shirt costumes jumping into a giant suitcase, and the last thing that goes in
Sure,
is a
that was
copy
funny.
of a guy is in a big book costume that's Shogun, and
Yeah.
like, but it's like, what? Why did you take the time to illustrate that? It's such an unimportant detail, but they had to show off this, like, oh, we have this production
Okay,
value
yeah,
thing.
that I forgot about that one. That one was actually really good.
Then
I
they have
wish.
him eating shrimp on a car, and they have like the flashing lights around him as
Sure,
this
that
kind
was
of
good.
moment when he's on the thing. They
That was
have,
like an outright a very death of a salesman type sort of visual like play gag.
yeah, they do the mother in the phone booth when Francine calls her. They do the pool where it's a series of cardboard things changing, and they throw out blue confetti for water,
Also, when he shoots himself in the head, it's just
and
red
it's red
confetti.
confetti.
Yep.
So like I thought they did I mean, so the things
Yeah,
you're
they
talking
did more
about,
than I
they
was remembering. Yeah, sure, you're right.
they that's what I mean by I thought it was really well observed.
It
Like
was well
they had to
observed, but
design it. So like when in order to and also to animate and put this on, they had to think about how does a live action play pull these off. Like the what they did in this episode could actually be realistically done. It
sure.
looked dumb. I think that's kind of the point, but I think that's what I thought was really interesting is that they did restrict themselves to the fact that this was what realistically would have to be done on a play in order to pull off certain of these weirder abstract things.
So the impression I got here is that there's a lot of really talented staff on this show. Shame
Yeah.
that they're on this show, though.
There's a little bit of that, I think. I think it looks a lot better because again, like all the Seth MacFarlane shows have a very similar style visually to them to some degree, but I've always felt that American Dad,
What the fuck was with the Cleveland show?
the Cleveland show was blander than this
Why
was.
did that? Well, why did that show happen? Like, just like,
Well,
why
they
we need
wanted to
more
do a
money?
They wanted to do a spin-off show off of Family Guy, and they realized that Cleveland was the only character they could do it off of without it being horribly offensive. Because one of the Family Guy main cast members is the literal gag around him is he is a horrible rapist.
Yep.
that is literally every gag about him. So they can't do him. The other character that's the friend character that they could have done a spinoff of is in a wheelchair, and they basically use him just to make being a crippled person is horribly depressing.
Thing is
And
that
that's the entire
he's
joke
also
there.
too important to the core cast, whereas Cleveland didn't actually matter that much.
Yeah, they
Which
didn't
is a
really use
really,
him that well.
really wonderful pitch for a show, by the way. It's like, here's the character that didn't matter. And it's got a black stereotype family, blah.
Well, they even do a joke about it. It's a show that was supposed to be made for black people, written by a white guy. Because the voice actor for Cleveland himself is one of the writers for Family Guy, and it's a white guy doing that voice.
Mm-hmm.
So again, well, the show, and I've watched some Cleveland show. It's not, I would say it's not as, it doesn't get as offensive as Family Guy does, but it doesn't really have the same joyful weirdness that makes American Dad different than Family Guy.
See, I don't know. Really...
And that one also has cutaway gags.
I
like
mean,
Family
a lot
Guy
of these
does.
shows have like really crude gags. I find it hard to be that offended by them in the sense that they tend to be pretty meh. If anything, I think it's just they're more intellectually like offensive than anything. They're so not like lowbrow, because I can respect lowbrow.
Yeah.
It's just like they have all this money and all this talent coming here, and it's like, this is all you can do. Like,
Yeah.
This is it. This is your best. Like there's like little glimpses of like, hey, you could probably do pretty good stuff here. And it's like, no, this is it, isn't it? Like this is all you've got. It's like, I've got better things to do.
It feels like they're restricted by the format they're given. So I think with American Dad, there is a lot of writing talent on the show, because like some of the gags they come up with are sometimes just offhand very brilliant. It's just that because they're given what they're given in terms of the characters and the visual style in the world, they're restricted. They can't really develop the characters beyond what they are, because that doesn't fit the way the show was designed.
Mm-hmm.
As much as it would be nice to see them change that. But the thing is, I think visually, American Dad, for the longest time, has always had the better visuals of the three shows, because
Low bar.
Which, yes, it's a low bar, but again, they're the most willing to change the style and be very accurate with that style.
Sure.
So like when there's one of the episodes I wanted you to watch that you didn't do was this one about the apocalypse, and it gets genuinely scary and horrifying and really weird, and they have these great intercuts with some very detailed comic book style art in it. So like there are some really talented people, and when they need to change the visual style or the directing style to match what they need, they're very good at that. Like there's some good observers on staff. It's not enough.
They've got a really good talented staff.
It's just wasted on a visual style that's very stiff.
Is it because of Seth MacFarlane?
Is
it Seth MacFarlane who's ultimately the one to blame here? Is he the man of blood here?
Well, yes,
the one who must die to save television.
Yes, he's the one that needs to be blamed for some of the visual stuff, because
the way
the characters are designed,
yeah,
it's very difficult for them to do acting. So there's the idea of character acting is that you design a character so that way they can express themselves in a variety of poses and can have a lot of different expressions that kind of read very clearly. In all of Seth MacFarlane's shows, the characters are really limited to the types of poses they can do. I again would say this show, yes, they're given the same kind of visual style. They push the acting more than the Family Guy does. If you look at Family Guy, they only have like 10 poses that they all do at any given time, and every character poses and moves the same way. American Dad does a little bit, but they can't break it that much because the characters have to remain, or at least the characters feel like they have to remain on model at all times. So they'll try to break up the posing a little bit, but they can't. They're not really permitted to. It's like with Steven Universe, for example, they have character models, but they're willing to kind of deform and change them to suit what they feel is necessary for the emotion and acting at that given point.
Right.
With these shows, it's almost like it's not animated in Flash or Toon Boom as far as I know, but it might as well be, because
or they're just tweening everything.
Yeah, I mean, it might as well be. It's not. It's animated in Korea,
absolutely.
But for all intents and purposes, it might as well be, because these are what I call. I kind of had this theory where these are dialogue and script-driven shows. They're not, it's not a SpongeBob, for example, where it's a storyboard and artist and animator-driven show, where it's the storyboard artists and animators who are also writing the show. So that way, when they are coming with the character dialogue, they've drawn the pose that they feel expresses that part of the dialogue the best. These shows are written up as a sitcom script and then given to the board artists who often I've actually I actually toured once the Family Guy studios because I knew some of the storyboard artists on there, and they have very little say on the script or how it's expressed. They kind of, it's very much, here's the script, board it out. If you find that you need to change something to make it work better, you're not a writer. Sorry, that's the writing team. So the animators and the story people very rarely in a lot of these shows get any feedback. So if they see something not working, they're not allowed to change it because they're not considered the writing staff because it's a script driven show, not an animator driven show. And I feel that kind of wall division limits a lot of what these shows can really do. If, again, what the show's potential is only so far. But again, of the three, I feel this one has the most potential of all three, but that's still lowballing it. I mean, it's not Bob's Burgers. I mean, Bob's Burgers is a delightful, really good show. This is not bad, but it's not great. And of the three shows that MacFarlane has had, it's the better of the three, but it doesn't mean it's reached the levels of like a early day Simpsons or a Bob's Burgers.
See, the impression I'm getting from here is that, like, ultimately there's a lot of talented staff, but it's almost like, I don't know how much it is actually true, but it's like the actual MacFarlane elements of it, like just from the writing or like kind of the character designs, like the character concepts, that's what's ultimately hampering these sort of shows. Is that it's like that. Like the initial pitch is for the shows are bad. The initial kind of character concept, the broad strokes are bad. The actual, that sort of stuff is not very good at all.
Yeah, look at how I don't know if you ever saw like the first few episodes of this show when it was first coming out.
Yeah, I saw it, yeah.
And then compare that show to Ricky Spanish or Stan's Food Restaurant. They're entirely different shows. The characters behave and look entirely differently. Roger, being who he was, completely had to change in order for the show to function. I think the way it was originally pitched was, well, Family Guy's canceled, we need another show. Because this was around development when Family Guy got canceled the first time. And I think he just wanted to remake the same show. And he kind of did on certain levels, but with a little bit of a difference, but only in terms of political subtext. And then once it was running and then Family Guy came back, that freed up the staff to go, well, we're not just remaking Family Guy anymore, because now Family Guy's back. They can just continue making Family Guy. And they started doing a lot more experimental things, and they started getting a little bit more freedom, and and then the staffs diverged. And I think they started finding their own voice over time. So I think that's what happened. Is I think the best successes of American Dad are oddly the way it's defied its Seth MacFarlane premise.
Yeah, but it's the impression I get though is that the staff here, the funding here, if you took out like the Seth MacFarlane stuff here and just had like someone else do the initial concept for it, and just have everything else here, it'd be a much more superior show.
Oh yes, I agree. I think there's a comedic voice that is underneath this show that is worth saving on some level. It's just that it's been hampered by the setting and the premise that it was originally set up. It's that I think that's its ultimate flaw, is that there is an interesting perspective within it, and there's a willingness to experiment and just really improvise a lot of things and just throw things at the wall and see how they work and things like that. But again, it comes down to this. It has to fit this dynamic that it was designed with from the start. They can't upend the entire series suddenly and change how that is to fit the needs later, because then it becomes confusing.
Right.
So if the staff behind this were given a chance to do a new show that has different visuals and things like that, I think there'd be a really great show underneath here. So the people behind it, I think, have talent on some level. They just need to be given a certain different degree of freedom and a different premise to work with, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So again, though, I don't think, as you said, you don't think it's a bad show, but it's not all that great.
I think there's much things people could do much better with their time.
Yeah. Whereas I still find it entertaining enough that it justifies it, and there's so few cartoons in this kind of world that I like watching these days. So Bob's Burgers is kind of the only one that I'm like, I have to sit down and watch this.
Mm-hmm.
That I end up liking American Dad a lot more, because at least within that universe of shows where it's kind of like comfort food in a certain way, that I don't have to think very hard and I can get certain and I'll get some laughs out of it. So at least there's that. Like when I'm watching a lot of whenever I see modern Family Guy episodes, there's no laughter out of it.
Sure.
With American Dad, at least you get laughs.
See,
It's the same thing. It's also, if I try to watch Big Bang Theory, I get the same problem where I'm like, I don't find any of this funny and I can't laugh. I'll appreciate something if it can at least make me laugh. I won't call it great art, but I'll go, okay, they accomplished something. They entertained me to a certain degree. It's not high art. It doesn't, again, approach anything near early day Simpsons where it was both funny and poignant at the same time.
Sure.
But given what the Simpsons has turned into, I go, well, this is just the world we live in at the moment, and the standards of comparison are just all over the place. Well, again, Bob's Burgers is the closest thing that has kind of filled that gap for me.
Sure.
That the Simpsons has left.
And to be honest, part of the show, I suppose, with my take on it, is that I did watch a bunch of the episodes for the purpose of this show or this cast in a row.
Yeah.
And that is kind of my preferred method of actually watching things is, somewhat marathon-like, not necessarily actual marathons of watching things, but I prefer to watch things in, sort of compiled nature. I've watched things, as they aired previously. It's not like I'm opposed to it, but that's not my preferred medium of doing it. This show does not hold up at all in terms of watching multiple episodes in a row.
Yeah,
like,
binge watching with this one is, can be difficult.
Binge watching those first 3 episodes in a row really made me fucking mad.
I remember.
So.
But I'm glad that you ended up being at least finding certain parts of it that I also agree
Sure,
with.
yeah.
So
I mean,
I'm not
like
crazy.
I said,
there's something in there. I'm
Yep.
not entirely insane. I at least have some good taste in here somewhere.
We need to start a new podcast about books. That's what you do with your life. Bookcast.
Bookcast. Which
alliteration dissection. Let's go.
Alliteration but that's not alliterative.
Well, that's our first dissection. We got our first episode ready.
Oh god. Just what people need. People talking about books on a podcast just as much as they need a visual medium being talked about on a podcast. Oh, whoops. Anyway, so I think that's a pretty good summary of American Dad. It's still currently running on TBS if you feel like watching it. You can find it on Netflix up to season 8 and on Hulu up, I think, to season 6. So there's a whole bunch of seasons that just, I don't know where you're going to watch them, but they're there somewhere. And again, I think there's something, if you're interested in seeing kind of an experimental type of humor and kind of some good non sequiturs, there is some good stuff and certain dialogue ticks that can kind of be pretty good. But in terms of character writing, this is not a show to watch for character writing. Go somewhere else for that, by all means. So that's American Dad. Next week, we are going to be covering Kiki's Delivery Service. And then after that, we're going to be following it with Rose of Versailles.
Yeah, so we decided to give you guys a little bit of a forewarning, so you guys have a little bit more time to work on it. Rose of Versailles is a anime that you can actually purchase on Amazon, by the way. So
it's also available on Crunchyroll now.
Oh, is it actually on Crunchyroll now?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
They put it up on Crunchyroll, which is great. So because it's a goddamn classic. It is unfortunately very long, so that's why we're giving you advance notice on Rose of Versailles. Kiki's Delivery Service is much easier to get. It's of course much shorter. Both interesting works by all means. So, and Rose of Versailles has a lot of influence. You can kind of trace back a lot of directors and artists being influenced by that show.
Mm-hmm.
And then people being influenced by the shows that were influenced by that show. So you can kind of trace a lot back to it. So I'm excited about Kiki's Delivery Service. The version we're watching is not going to be the dubbed version, because that one is, while I do like Phil Hartman quite a lot, I kind of want to watch the original with the subtitles, because in the American English dub, they changed some of the dialogue and added dialogue where there wasn't, and changed the characterization of one of the characters a bit through that. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go with the way Miyazaki had originally directed it for this case. I'm not a hardliner on dubs for the most part, but in this case, I go.
You just hate Phil Hartman. Admit it.
Oh no. I would gladly have traded Phil Hartman's life for Adam Sandler's. That would be very much.
Well, that's a really
that's not a hard choice.
Trade.
That is hardly Sophie's choice. But
I'd give you a nickel today for $1 million tomorrow.
Pretty much. That's it. That's exactly it. So, like I said, Kiki's Delivery Service, followed by Rose of Versailles. You can find me on Twitter at RYMagnuson.
And I'm at SA Zorak.
You can always email us at adthepodcast@gmail.com. We do read your emails. Sometimes if they're too long, I can't read them on the air because it's a bit hard to do that. But definitely send them in. We might do a compilation of email episode later when we have more built up. But also, if you have suggestions, the list is growing constantly, and I'm always hearing about these great series that I have never heard of before that I kind of wish I did. So please definitely send those in. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Catch us on iTunes, on Twitter, all that stuff. See you next week.